Let's get a little history of all of this with Professor Meg Russell, Director of the Constitution Unit at UCL, University College London. Also with us in the studio is Lord James Bethell, Lord Bethell, Conservative hereditary peer. I didn't even know you were a hereditary peer. I'd assumed you'd been appointed, actually, James. But look, Meg, let's start. We were trying to work out. The House of Lords goes back quite a long way. It's always had hereditary peers in. This is going to be a big moment. How old is it, roughly even?
Well, it's very hard to pin down a particular moment. I mean, you can trace it back at least 1,000 years. It is, in a sense, older than the House of Commons. We had this chamber, which eventually divided into two around about the 14th century, and so the House of Lords and House of Commons became distinct. The House of Commons gradually became more democratic. The House of Lords was always made up of the nobility, so hereditary positions, and also the bishops, of course, who are still there, 26 of them. And over that time, it has evolved, a term I think you used, gradually, various minor reforms, small reforms, one building on another, and it has become fundamentally a completely different body to what it was, but it's never undergone a really big bang reform. It's always one small change chipping away at the old structure and creating something gradually new.
Well, the big moment is when we start getting non-hereditary peers, and that's actually incredibly recent, isn't it?
Well, one of the things which one notes, if you look back at the history of House of Lords reform, is that essentially nothing ever happens that hasn't been debated for decades at least. So the introduction of life peers was debated well back into the 19th century, and there was an act in 1876 which allowed for the first time any life peers, but they were very specifically people with high legal qualifications to serve in the House of Lords as a court, the thing that has now become the Supreme Court. You have to wait until 1958 until it becomes standard practice that the Prime Minister can appoint people for life rather than as hereditary peers. So actually,
it's
1958,
really that recent.
which is also the time that women arrive in the House of Lords for the first time. Until that point, the only way that the Prime Minister could get somebody in was by creating a hereditary peerage. So you've got people in there like the grandson of Labour's post-war Prime Minister Clement Attlee. You know, these are not all toffs. About half the hereditary peers come from peerages that were created in the 20th century.
Oh my goodness. Well, that is a great seg into you, James Bethell. Tell us about your heritage.
Well, that's right. My great-grandfather bought his peerage in 1923.
He bought it.
He was a social radical. He was a good friend of Lloyd George's and campaigned heavily for the dispossessed and underprivileged in the East End of London. He built hospitals and schools and cemeteries and sewage plants, and was an utterly commendable Christian philanthropist. And that service tradition has been really profound in my family for 5 generations. My father was a very, very enthusiastic member of the House of Lords, and when my time came, I stepped up, and I've been there for 8 years.
Do you feel your place there is completely illegitimate? I mean, the story that you're there because your great-grandfather bought his way in just sounds so preposterous, and you obviously you would...
It's a massive dilemma. On the one hand, it's totally anachronistic in the 21st century for this strange tradition to be there. But we also have a monarchy. And I, on a personal level, have really felt a strong sense of privilege about being given the chance to do public service. And I hope that I have stepped up. I served as a minister. I didn't have to do that during the pandemic. I took one for the team for 2 years trying to help with our response to that. I've worked very hard on legislation. My family and my professional life have suffered as a result, but I've really enjoyed it. And in the snakes and ladders of life, it's given me personally a huge opportunity.
Meg, 99 was when there was this massive change when essentially most of the hereditary peers were told you're no longer going to be sitting and voting members of the House of Lords. 92 could remain, and then they would select them among themselves. A lot of people say, since you've selected 92 out of the very large pot of hereditary peers, you have ended up with quite good peers.
Yes. I mean, the 1999 reform is obviously very important. At the time, it was felt to be inadequate and partial and so on. But as you say, you know, it's huge in its repercussions looking back. The House of Lords at that time had about 1,200 members in it, so about half the members left as a result.
I mean,
of that
1,200
reform.
is ridiculous, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, but if we're not careful, we'll be back there soon. So we need to cap the appointments, which is something that's still on the agenda. But after that point, You're going to have to tell me the question
You
again.
will. You now had a selected number of
totally.
the hereditaries.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's ironic that the only elected members of the House of Lords are hereditary peers, of course, and they do have to go through a process where they stand and are selected by their own. But of course, the only people who can stand for those elections are people like James who have inherited titles, and that is rather anachronistic. I mean, I think this reform. Nobody, I think, thinks that this is done with any sort of sense of malice towards the individuals who serve, many of whom have served very, very well. Yeah. But it's the principle that we still have this hereditary element in our legislature, which is quite overdue action.
Right, so you're not going to vote against the bill?
No, I'll vote for the bill. But I do feel sad that people like Freddie Howe, Charles Courtney, Charles Knoll, Tom Strathclyde, these are people who have huge expertise, have put decades of work, and they are being thrown out on their ear. They thought they had lifetime tenure, and I'd like to see them get
there's a solution.
Peerages. Yeah, right.
You just give them a life peerage and get them back in again if you think they're the...
Yes, well, that's what I rather hope will be the outcome of this. And there will be people who have still a lot to give to the House of Lords, and I hope that there will be a list of people who find a way back because they have given a lot and have a lot yet to give.
A lot of you are Tory, aren't you? You hereditaries, disproportionately Tory, aren't you?
Yes, it comes from the 1999 settlement. 43 of us are Tories, and a lot of this has been about political arithmetic, and therefore a rebalancing from that point of view does make sense.
Do you feel we need to go much further? That this is a sort of 3-year stopgap, but we actually have to do a proper full-scale reform? Are you keen on that? Or?
Yeah, I think, that's what slightly sticks in my throat on this, which is, again, as Meg said, we're going to have a small tweak. A few people are being chucked out on their ears and are being called indefensible, but actually it's not being cleaned up and tidied up. There should be a really thorough appointments process. Thurso has got a point there, and there is no sign of that happening. And there should be a really clear way that when people are at the end of their professional life and can't give in the way that they used to, that they are politely and courteously given another way to serve, to put it politely. So yes, those two things are really important to get right. That said, can I just defend what the House of Lords is doing today? In terms of its legislative scrutiny, I don't think it's ever been better. We've had a real golden age of the House of Lords in the last few years.
Meg, you briefly wanted to...
In response to what James said there was, of course, a statement in the Labour Party manifesto that they were going to reform the appointments process, and also the statement that the House of Lords is too big. And I think we probably all agree on that. And so dealing with those two things is an essential next step, I think, alongside this change.
Lord Bethell, James Bethell, thank you so much. Meg Russell too, from UCL. Good luck with your future career, James. I'm sure you'll be usefully employed.
Thanks, Evan.